Welcome to the Jay Martin Show, where we dissect the greatest minds in geopolitics and finance. My guest today is the fan favorite, Andy Schectman. Now, Andy and I discussed two things today. Number one, we had to recap the 2024 BRICS Summit. BRICS is one of Andy's core focuses, and he's always way more up to speed on BRICS currency developments, and quite a few disruptions and news events came out of the BRICS Summit that changed the trajectory of BRICS as an organization. So you're going to want to pay attention to all of this. And secondly, we covered a very little known about event that occurred at a small regional bank in Oklahoma. Now, although it did not make any press, this is an event that changes the game for any American depositors. It's big news. Here is Andy Schectman on the Jay Martin Show. And if you want to meet Andy in person, come to my event, the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference, January 19th and 20th in Vancouver, BC. Over 100 keynote speakers, 10,000 investors, 300 mining companies on the trade show floor, 6 stages. It's a beast. Go to cambridgehouse.com for tickets. Here is Andy Schectman. Enjoy.
This is Jay Martin.
All right, here I am with Andy Schectman. Andy, it's great to have you back in the program, man. Good to see you.
Jay, it's always good to be back with you too, brother. Thanks for having me.
Well, I wanted to have you on today because we got to recap the BRICS Summit that just occurred. There's quite the variety of media takeaways. I want to get into some meat today. However, I don't want to take anything for granted with anybody watching this. So before we get into maybe what the results and takeaways of the BRICS Summit might be, could you start, Andy, for anybody who's newer to that subject matter and just say, what was the BRICS Summit, who was meeting, and generally speaking, what was their intention?
Yeah, well, I mean, the BRICS is a growing chorus of countries. It's originally started about 18 years ago, the acronym for Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. It has grown to 9 countries when you add in the others: Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia straddling the fence. And the meeting that we had here in Russia, a lot of things were on the table. Some things are very interesting how they played out, but some of the things that people were expecting was again some form of a common settlement currency, and the BIS kind of put a knife into that, which I think we'll talk about in a little bit. But some things came out of the BRICS meeting in terms of, look, we're seeing, I don't know, as many as 40 countries have informally applied to the meeting, or to the fold rather, thrown their hat into the ring with, 20, 25 that have formally applied, and up to 40 that have expressed interest. And this is a trend that is growing, but one that will, I think, be met with a lot of challenges. And the big pushback that a lot of people have with this group is trust. Who's going to trust who? These countries are very much, in many ways, opposed on certain narratives. Is the conventional wisdom, and I think that, at least on the onset, what struck me was what they're trying to show is unity, strength through unity. And I'll just say that in 2 examples that stuck out to me, they made a very big deal about showing how Modi from India and Xi Jinping from China met on the sidelines to agree on issues regarding their border in Kashmir, that it was very friendly, that they are moving towards common goals and peace through unity. And the same thing could be said of Iran and Saudi Arabia, Sunni and Shiite countries that for years, if not centuries, have been at each other's throats. China brokered a peace deal between them last year, and lo and behold, talk of building embassies in each other's countries, and it was announced that they're going to have a joint naval exercise. So, look, I think we'll get into what happened there, but what they're trying to show the world is that this is a new way of multipolarity where it is not about coercion, but rather cooperation. And they're really trying to make, I think, an effort to show that, which is a good thing, of course. But in essence, what BRICS is to me, Jay, is a group of countries that are pushing back against the Western hegemony, pushing back against the ability of the West to make rules and to impose sanctions, and at the same time to really, I think, disrespect, if you will, the privilege of being the world reserve currency in the way that we are conducting our fiscal and monetary affairs.
Okay, thanks for that. And there's a few threads I want to pull on, but first, would it be fair to say, Andy, that there's sort of two mandates, or there's a mandate that hasn't been fully committed to yet? One would be a replacement of the current financial order. And that replacement mandate would be largely pushed by maybe China and Russia. But the other mandate might be a bit softer. It might be just a reformation of the current financial structure, but maintain ties with the West, which would be pushed by India and Brazil, who are much more reliant. So that's just the four core countries, notwithstanding the other, 9, 10 that have joined since. But is that a fair estimate at this point, that there's maybe two proposals about what the mandate should be? One is more aggressive, pushed by China, Russia. One is less aggressive, but still reformation, pushed by India, Brazil.
Yeah, that is true. And, India and Brazil both are straddling the line between their allegiance to this new grouping, the whole ideology behind it, and to the West. Of course, it's not, it shouldn't be a surprise that Russia is standing behind this change of the system, and China for that matter. Obviously, Russia being directly affected by the sanctions. And of course, I think China is very wise in the way that they are also approaching these things, but at the same time, understand that this is something you cannot really cross that bridge, if you will, until you have mass adoption. So yes, I think they wish they could break free from the current system and go to one that is more multipolar, but understand that some of the countries there are not ready to turn their back on the West yet. This is a very big decision that can't be done until and if all of the ducks are in a row, for sure.
Yeah. Okay. And so you mentioned some of the division inside the BRICS too, which will be something that needs to be overcome, whether it's just the sort of dual mandates not quite landed yet, or you mentioned, thanks for mentioning the territory dispute in the Himalayas, because a lot of people haven't followed that China and India have erupted in military conflict, I think 3 times in the last 5 years over their border dispute through the Himalayas. In 2022, I think 20 Indian soldiers and 4 Chinese troops were killed in battle along that border. Apparently things have settled. Modi gifted Xi Jinping some arts last week in Russia at the summit. But these are they're right beneath the surface. And that's not the only tension. There's Russian and Chinese forces in combat in Sudan as recent as 6 months ago. There's always these other disputes right beneath the surface. The headline is BRICS nation cooperation against Western hegemony. And that is very true. But, kind of I always make this analogy or parallel. I don't know if you think this is at all relevant, but, when you're trying to overthrow somebody, you can park a lot of ideological differences for a period of time, very much like American and Soviet forces fighting shoulder to shoulder during the end of World War II to overthrow the Nazis. But once they overthrew the Nazis, those ideological differences boiled up to the surface right away. We found ourselves in the Cold War immediately, right? You can park them for a minute when the goal is in progress, but once you've ticked that box, usually everything else comes to the surface. Do you think that's a fair parallel and maybe one of the challenges that BRICS will have to work through?
Yes, I do, and it is. I mean, that's human nature. The entire BRICS alliance is one of cooperation. There is no mandate that holds them all together. It's more like, I guess you could say, action and behavior oriented and reputation oriented in the respect that it's cooperation. And really, that's what good business is. It's a handshake. It's earning trust in a system that is certainly lacking trust. And, again, they reiterated over and over again their commitment to enhancing financial cooperation and cross-border payment solutions. And all of this is to break free from the West. So you're right. There is a common enemy. My enemy's enemy is my friend, that kind of thing, or a common goal. And one would wonder if the divisiveness, that camel sticks its nose under the tent again once and if they were to achieve their interests. But look, for now, that is really something that I saw as very important. This came out the very first day of the meeting, and they wanted really to make it seem as though these are countries pulling together and putting aside differences. Of course, certain things happened throughout the meeting that changed my focus on what was really very important. But that is one of them, of course, certainly. There are other very important things that have come out of this meeting. But one thing is in my opinion, for sure, and it's really not debatable, that this is a growing chorus of countries. And while there will be setbacks, while there will be challenges, I think to underestimate it is a big mistake. Again, 47 countries have expressed interest, 26 formally, 21 informally. And I think that list will grow as they really solidify everything that they're trying to do in all areas, from commerce, from trade routes, from common settlement currencies to trading in local currencies, to commodities, to commodity exchanges, to all sorts of things that are on the docket. I think it's important to understand that this is one of these deals that, myself included, I think it's easy to expect things to happen faster than they probably ought to. And one thing that they have exhibited, I think, is restraint in that matter, in an attempt to do things the right way. And by some of the things that we're seeing, I would argue that they are.
Now, what do you make of Saudi Arabia's? So, they expressed some interest, received an invitation, have not acted on it yet, and their absence was a bit conspicuous at this year's summit. And I only say that because when they received the invitation, it made headlines everywhere. Saudi Arabia is joining the BRICs, and it was this, high confidence thing that was going to occur. What do you make of them not attending this year's BRICS summit? Do you think that's a symbol of something, or are people overthinking it by saying, we should have a look at this? What's your take, Andy?
I think it's they're playing both sides, for sure. In the respect that, look, they joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, they've joined the New Development Bank. They became the fifth full participant in Ambridge, and there's some new information on Ambridge that we need to discuss, because that was something that really has been the focus of anyone commenting on the BRICS for the past few months, a common settlement currency that we were told by Dilma Rousseff, the former president of Brazil and the head of the New Development Bank, that they had agreed in principle to this new system. But Saudi Arabia, to me, look, you can point to the G7 meeting a few months ago, and at the same time, there was a BRICS meeting in Novograd, Russia, where Dilma Rousseff made these statements, where they were invited to the G7 meeting and turned it down and instead sent their delegates to the BRICS. So yes, on one hand, they're straddling that line. On the other hand, by their actions, you see turning down of the G7 invitation, going to the BRICS meeting, being on the Belt Road Initiative with all the other, OPEC countries, being the fifth full-time participant in Ambridge, which is the cross-border payment system that they are trying to bring to the fold. And again, we need to talk about that. But a system that's not compatible with dollars, that is supposedly the in principle agreed upon trade platform for cross-border settlement outside the SWIFT system. And between all of these things, plus in August of this year, not re-signing what amounts to an exclusivity deal for energy settlement with the dollar, not saying we won't take it, but that we're going to take other things as well. You could argue that they are just masterfully playing both sides, but their actions lean, in my mind, to the BRICs.
Okay.
I guess they saw how we dealt with Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi, both who had expressed interest in deviating from oil sales in dollars, and maybe they understand that this is something that, again, that you don't do it until all of your ducks are in a row, and they're playing both sides as far as I'm concerned. But yes, conspicuous indeed.
Yeah. And they can play both sides given their position in this. So let's migrate to Ambridge, because as you said, there's new information on Ambridge that we should discuss. We covered the sort of the origin and concept of Ambridge in our last interview. Maybe a 30-second overview for anybody who didn't watch that, but go back. I'll link to it beneath. Go back and watch that if you want a more detailed explanation into the origins of Ambridge. But maybe a 30-second overview, Andy, and then why this is newsworthy today, what's shifting.
Yeah, one of the things about Ambridge, I was doing an interview with Michelle McCory, and I mentioned to her that Ambridge was a cross-border payment system that was designed by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, United Arab Emirates, and a program or a bridge, if you will, that allows cross-border settlement with central bank digital currencies. So that on the first point is that the whole program, the idea was to promote cross-border settlement of central bank digital currencies free from the SWIFT interference. And then the interesting part about it is that Saudi Arabia became the fifth full participant. But taking a step back, you see that this was developed through the Bank of International Settlements new development hub or something along those lines, a branch of the Bank of International Settlements, the innovation hub, rather, excuse me. And Michelle said, well, that's a Western entity, isn't it? I said, yeah, you are right about that. And I've always, until someone said it, it's always been in the back of my mind that it's strange that the BIS was involved in this. But it was a plan for, in fact, Elma Rousseff, when she came out and announced that in principle, we've agreed to a new settlement currency called the unit that is traded over Ambridge that will be 40% backed by gold. And we've talked about that a lot. I have in a lot of my podcasts, but this was what everyone was expecting, that they would issue the unit, that it is a settlement token that would be traded over Ambridge and give these countries the ability to settle outside the dollar. And it really focused on gold. And of course, there is something called BRICs Clear that does focus on gold, which we can talk about after. But it was always something that kind of bothered me in the back of my mind. And when Michelle said that, it kind of the ding, ding, ding went off. And I've really been thinking about it a lot lately. This was just maybe 2 weeks ago that her and I spoke. And, I guess, the old saying, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. The BIS has come out and, under Western pressure, I guess, recently said that they may pull the plug on this. We hear a spokesman for the State Department come out just the other day and say alternatives to the SWIFT system and undermining of the dollar's role threaten global democracy. Really? So, an alternative to your system, one that benefits the majority of human population. The amount of countries that would benefit from this to build their own economies by trading, these developing nations, by trading over Ambridge in a basket of local currencies would only strengthen their own economies. But evidently the United States believes that this is a threat to democracy. And that we could never allow that happen. So the BIS came out with a statement saying they're debating on whether or not to shut down the Ambridge project. It says a pilot cross-border payments platform, which promises to allow sending money around the world without relying on U.S. banks. And some of the interesting things about it is, you have Augustin Carstens, the BIS general manager. Here they are building this. The innovation hub, building it with these countries with it in mind to be the BRICS payment system. And he comes out after it's now operational And he says, we cannot directly support any project for the BRICs because we cannot operate with countries that are subject to sanctions. I want to be very clear about that. Well, where the hell have they been for the last 2 years, 3 years in its development? And then you've got someone named Agaf Demarius, a senior policy fellow at the European Council of Foreign Affairs. In the long run, there is no doubt that the mechanisms like BRICS Bridge could be useful for China and Russia or others to hide sensitive transactions from Western authorities. And the underlying technology is a tool to circumvent sanctions and potentially undermine the dollar's dominance in the global financial system. I mean, if you couldn't put a bigger nail in the coffin of the dollar's hegemony, I don't know what is. I mean, this is only going to strengthen the resolve of these countries to push away from what to them and to the world, just if you take a step back and try to be, neutral about it, is never-ending hegemony, holier than thou attitude, where if anything tries to challenge the SWIFT system and the dollar hegemony, it is a threat to global democracy and must be put to an end. It's very interesting that they did this at the 12th hour, right as it's been released they called it minimum operational form. It was, in its basic form, but had big plans for rolling this out. And now they're trying to put a knife in it. I think it's interesting.
So most people in the West are familiar with the SWIFT system. This is how international payments are settled. This is what Russia has been exiled from, why they can no longer participate. In fact, during the BRICS summit, all delegates were notified that non-Russian credit cards would not work in Russia. And ironically, they were encouraged to bring US dollars to spend or euros. Ambridge is an answer to that. It's an alternate to the SWIFT system, therefore favored heavily by those BRICS countries. Interesting to note that this has largely been developed by the Bank of International Settlements Innovation Hub, which, yes, is sort of a Western leaning or maybe Western favoring organization. Despite their involvement in the development of Ambridge and the unit, which will be the currency that will be able to transact on these new financial rails, and therefore replace the US dollar as the trade currency. For some reason, very recently, the United States started raising a flag and saying this is absolutely unacceptable and a threat to democracy, causing the BIS to suddenly step back. Okay, did I summarize? That's
perfect. Much better than I did. Much more clear.
All right. So the questions that then come out of this, Andy, like you mentioned, so why now from the United States? Initially, I could be like, well, they are maybe underestimating the threats until now it seems to be quite legitimate and something they need to tackle head on. Maybe they've been so distracted with internal conflict that, taking a broader view of things hasn't been at the top of the agenda. I don't know. But I'm very curious about the BIS pivot. That strikes me as how you could exactly walk this path so far, and then suddenly be coerced to pivot by a state actor who you had to have known the entire time was opposed to this idea. Like, this can't be news that Ambridge is opposed to the United States hegemony. So how do you interpret the timing and the sudden pushback and the sudden pivot, as you mentioned, at the 12th hour? Like, are there any sort of subsurface intentions or incentives that strike you?
I mean, it's disheartening. It's a setback. I mean, someone's arm was twisted. I think it's ironic that they really focus on Putin in the article, that as if he's the only one to benefit from multipolarity, when it actually benefits all of the developing nations. It's hugely slanted in terms of the way that it is written. At least the way that the article is written has a huge Western slant to it, focusing on the fact that they just are more or less, creating a boogeyman in Putin and Xi Jinping, and saying this is how these countries are going to sidestep, they're going to do their things that are devious, as if we have to stand as the beacon of democracy, standing over every single transaction that is done across the globe. This is exactly what it's all about, the pushback from it, and it's only going to strengthen it. But, I think it's almost dirty in the way that they did it. Is it stupidity on behalf of the Chinese and the folks from United Arab Emirates and did they not see this coming? I don't know. But they're blaming it mostly on Putin. They're saying that he will, hide his illicit transactions. So it's almost as if maybe they used it, the technology was developed almost exclusively from China. Maybe they used it as a tool to gather the technology, and then right at the 12th hour say we're backing out and shutting it off, and capture all of the technology framework for their own endeavors. I mean, something along those lines that doesn't make sense, to your point. It's either naive on behalf of the countries that were involved in it, or really, really not very emblematic of the way a democracy would do business. It's very underhanded for sure.
That's an interesting take. There's almost, and I don't think it's a stretch to say there's potentially an espionage angle to this, right? That makes a lot of sense.
That again, once again, I commend you on your eloquence. You've been doing these interviews a long time. That is a better way to say it. It's almost like espionage. It's almost like James Bond, And just when you think we're about to give a hug, you turn around and punch him in the nose and say, sorry, thanks for the memories. I mean, that's what it's like. And it's just more of the way that I think you would envision this to go in a James Bond movie. The triumphant West at the 12th hour steals the technology and thwarts those who want to, change the system into their own favor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just generally how humans jockey for power. It's funny how frequently, if you go further and further down the geopolitical rabbit holes and the power deals that are brokered, if you also enjoy, just as a hobby, studying narco organizations, you see a lot of parallels in how alliances are formed, backstabs occur, and strategy is laid out, right? It's
maybe that's that old statement, keep your friends close, but your enemies closer.
Yeah. Okay. So back it up now to the summit itself. Another comment you made, Andy, was things occurred during the summit that changed your opinion about what was important. I imagine we just covered a big one. But anything else strike you as results from the BRICS summit that maybe people who are following the BRICS story should be kept aware of?
Yeah, I think we want to talk about BRICS Pay, BRICS Clear, and also the announcement of the desire to build a BRICS precious metals platform. Let's start there for a moment, and then I'll go back to BRICS Pay and BRICS Clear. For the past year or so, we have seen, in my opinion, the BRICS countries employ what is very much like a three-pronged approach to accumulating commodities. And the first one, I would argue, is that they have been gradually depleting the above-ground stockpiles on the Western exchanges. And they have been. We saw 8% of the LBMA silver float delivered in the month of August. We've been seeing for 3 years now huge deliveries, whether they be in exchange for delivery, where contracts are bought on COMEX and delivered to Brinks Hong Kong. That's an exchange for delivery contract that was built or came into play in 2015, 16, or 17, and it's been exploited quite a bit since. But we're seeing metal come off, being delivered off of the Western exchanges very meticulously, using the suppression of the Western paper market, which is massively short. The commercial banks are holding down the price of gold and silver to the best of their ability. They're caught, and in the respect that these countries now are coordinated and motivated and sophisticated, and they're standing for delivery. This is something that never happened before, where these contracts would be placed where, as an example, in silver on the LBMA, you have close to 2.9 billion ounces of silver traded per day. That's 3.5 times annual global mine supply, and it is 90% paper. The commercial banks control the price. They're short between 4 and 6 billion ounces on the LBMA, somewhere between 700 and 800 million on COMEX. These banks are as dumb as a mud wall because these countries now are coordinated and are standing for delivery, something we never saw before, which is a systemic risk, actually, for the banks, ultimately. The second thing they've been doing is we've been seeing these types of products grow, or the exchanges that are trading these products in their regional capacity. What I mean by that is that, for example, you see the Shanghai Metals Exchange, and over the past 6 months, the combined volume of the Shanghai Metals Exchange and Futures Exchange has increased 500-600%. It now actually outpaces that of the COMEX. It is the second most actively traded metals market in the world. And unlike the COMEX, which is massively rehypothecated, the Shanghai Metals Exchange, to buy a bar of silver, you have to buy it from an approved refiner. One of 6 or 7 that they have, they laser etch a number on it, and that is then directly attributed to your bar. Where on COMEX, the rehypothecation or the reselling of the same contract over and over and over again approaches 15, 16, 1700%. And again, there's way more silver in the form of contracts than there are bars standing behind it. These are all very, very troubling things, but the West is stupid enough to continue to do this, and these countries not only are draining the exchanges, but increasing the demand and legitimacy of their exchanges in Dubai and in Shanghai, etc. Lastly, they've been flying, like China, as an example, has been flying all around Latin America. I did an interview with Sean Kunkun. I know you know him, and he's a great guy. And he validated, he said, listen, Andy, they're flying around Latin America. They're going directly to the miners, and they're saying, we will buy your Doré bar, which is a crudely refined bar by the miner before it gets sent for further refining, maybe 40, 50% pure, and concentrate, which is a byproduct, it's like sludge. They're buying it, paying much more than the West will, and shipping it back to China to further refine, disintermediate it from the markets and the exchanges and the commercial banks. They're already the second largest producer of silver in the world. You have India importing 800 or 900 million ounces of silver, depending upon who you read, over the last 4 years. You have Russia now accumulating gold daily and now saying they're going to accumulate silver, platinum, and palladium. No country's ever said that. You have all of these countries that understand that resources are important and are moving in this direction. And for them to come out and say we want to issue an exchange, a metals exchange that will challenge the COMEX and the LBMA because they're fraudulent, more or less, because they are rehypothecating so very much of the ownership, it's a very big deal. And will it happen? I guess we'll see. But these are the countries that have been buying it, accumulating it, and repatriating it. Wouldn't surprise me one bit to see something like that come, and as a very detrimental threat to the West, who is paper naked short massive, massive amounts of gold and silver, where real price settlement would actually flourish, opposite to the way that the markets are traded in London and in New York.
That's really interesting. It's kind of like there's a fiat world where wealth is being trapped in fiat currency, in paper contracts on gold bars instead of on gold bars. Even they get like a tremendous amount of wealth stored in paper gains on share prices in the stock market. And, the opposite approach in the East, let's get back to hard asset accumulation. Any student of history knows we're always at war as a species over resources. We always have been, always will be. Call it territory. It's territory that has resources. That's always been it. And you can find very deep and meaningful battles like the oil wars over the last 30 years, or kind of silly wars like the banana wars at the end of the 18th century, where the United States went to war in Cuba and Honduras and El Salvador to protect the interest of the United Fruit Company. They went to war over bananas. It's always over resources, always. And paper contracts on resources are not the same thing. So moving down your list, then we talk about the BRICs, precious metals settlements, and the significance of that and how things are adjusting. Next, you had BRICs Clear and BRICs Pay. I'm more familiar with BRICs Pay than I am with BRICs Clear. So maybe could we start there, or whichever is more logical to you, Andy?
Yeah, BRICs Pay is more or less retail business to business or consumer retail. It's just like a monetary passport. I guess you could say it allows you to, it would be an app on your phone or a credit card that would allow you to freely, purchase items in any of the BRICS countries without having to convert your currency first. And it's just a way to, again, all of this done outside of the SWIFT system. It would allow these countries to, or these people who are in these countries, to transact business in whichever BRICS member country they are in without converting first. And that's just to address the common folk. Ambridge was never for the common folk, nor is BRICs Clear. Just look at it as a monetary passport. When you're traveling through the BRICS countries, all you need is the app on your phone, and you would be able to, to pay for hotels and travel and food and all of those kinds of things, shopping or whatever it is that you wanted to do. But when we talk about BRICs Clear, it's a much bigger deal. It's a proposed independent cross-border settlement and depository system that is very different than, not very different rather, than the Ambridge in theory. It would be that the member countries would be able to exchange goods using their respective local currencies, but recorded on a BRICs Clear ledger. And it would allow payments to be settled on a net rather than a gross basis. So it wouldn't have to be settled in real time, as an example. You could do it monthly. And it would be administered by the commercial banks as a due to or a due from entry on the ledger. And it reduces the need for immediate currency exchanges. And at the same time, it allows streamlining cross-border trade without reliance on the dollar. Again, this is going to be outside the dollar purview. Basically, the way that it is being described and written about, and James Rickards has done a great job writing about it, is the premise of taking your settlement amount, and whether it be because you don't want to have the risk of exchange rate risk, or maybe you just have too much in terms of balance of payment, you have too much of one currency. They're saying you take that currency and you buy gold with it, is in essence what he is saying. That he says to manage exchange rate risk, parties can use excess counterparty currency balances to purchase gold, effectively reducing exposure in any single currency. And if a party holds too much of any particular currency, they can also rebalance by buying gold. This setup functions as a de facto gold standard, albeit without fixed exchange rates or large central bank reserves of freely convertible gold. Instead, it leverages market forces, which are still primarily denominated in US dollars, but it still positions gold as an anchor in a new monetary system. In other words, you see all these countries massively buying gold. This will allow a cross-border payment system on a ledger, and instead of settling all of the money with currency, they will do a net basis at every quarter or every month or whatever it is, and any excess will be put into gold, which is the only other tier one asset, which we can see, regardless of if it's going to be pegged to the unit settlement over Ambridge or some other thing, that it's taking on a significant role in the eyes of certainly of the BRICS community, and I would argue globally, it's becoming it's coming full circle. It's being remonetized and viewed as an anchor to the system, to whatever new system that is.
Okay. So BRICS Pay, as we've discussed it thus far, is mainly for the consumer. It's so that they can travel from country to country inside the BRICS plus nations with an app on their phone. But I mean, effectively think of a credit card that works to whatever countries that credit card is accepted in. And this is a new option for the citizens of BRICS countries to have that transaction ability no matter where they are inside BRICS plus nations. BRICS Clear is more for international trade settlement. So bigger picture, I think government trade, international trade within the same community of countries, more than likely. Now, correct me. I've got two questions on this one, Andy. So first of all, maybe BRICS Clear is a better example because larger transactions, country to country trade, sometimes you'll end up trading with a country receiving a surplus of currency that you can't really use anywhere. I think, Indonesian rupiah, you can't do so much with that, right? Indian rupees, you can only do so much with those currencies. But inside the BRICS Clear system, you have the ability to settle a surplus of foreign currency in gold and receive gold. Therefore, the BRICS precious metals settlement piece, the first one we began with, is you need this, right? This is what allows countries to transact with a BRICS Clear system and then settle in gold. That's only possible because of the BRICS precious metals settlement scope, I suppose. It's a bit clunky, but am I wrapping my mind around the concept reasonably, Andy?
Yeah, this is. And, I look, to me, what this is a stopgap. It's a workaround, if you will. It works, but it isn't ultimately a BRICS currency. Maybe we won't see it. Maybe we will. But all of this chips away at the hegemony and the transaction volume of the dollar, whether it be BRICS Pay or BRICS Clear. Ultimately, these countries will continue to work on developing and streamlining their plan without the help of the BIS Innovation Hub. And so, but yes, that's exactly what it is. And I think it also encourages trade because they're settling on a net basis rather than a gross. So, I'll trade you, oil and you trade me, technology, or you trade me wheat or whatever. And that it's the trading back and forth with a settling, which is just a smaller piece. It's the difference really between those trades. And so it doesn't necessitate immediate conversion if you have the banks on board who say, yes, we'll keep this on the ledger. And at the end of the quarter, at the end of the month, we'll settle up. And yeah, you can settle up in gold, which is more or less what it is. It's kind of a barter system on a very, very big scale with settling up at the end of each quarter or month.
Okay. Stepping back from the near-term success or failure of ideas like BRICS Clear, Ambridge, et cetera, if you take enough cracks at something, eventually you break through, right? And that's what we are watching, really, Andy, correct? Is, a continued and persistent attempt of an increasingly organized group of countries trying to replace the existing order. And they might not get it right immediately. It might take longer than they want it to, but this is in motion. And this is a coordinated effort from a lot of very powerful countries that include, am I right, 40% of the world's population, maybe more?
And growing.
And growing.
Yeah, and
growing. And you don't see any reason why that momentum would slow, do you? Or what do you think?
I mean, you open up, you turn on the internet yesterday and you see the headline, the group of seven G7 leaders have finalized an agreement to channel profits from frozen Russian assets into a $50 billion loan
Yeah, I saw that.
for the Ukraine, according to a statement. And I think when you talk about the way that, the West is imposing these sanctions, while at the same time destroying the value of the currency. And you can have the State Department say something as insane as, any challenge to the SWIFT system and the dollar is a direct threat to global democracy. Well, this is exactly. And then to see the BIS do what is in essence, you're right, espionage, if you will, at the 12th hour, this is crystallizing what these countries, I think, are feeling. And you mentioned, about gold. Look, when you see that the central banks buying gold the way that they are, it should tell you that gold is a monetary asset. And to your point, these smaller countries, interestingly enough, I do want to mention Poland. They added 18.7 tons, as did India. Turkey, who is a NATO member, officially applied to BRICS 14.7 tons. Uzbekistan 7.5, Czech Republic 5.89, and others. A lot of these smaller countries are adding. But yeah, it just as a side note, and it's I want to see if I can. I don't know if I can find the exact thing that I want to read to you. I probably can't.
No, take your time, look it up. It's really interesting in that Poland is accumulating so much, 18.7 tons. Poland's such a fascinating country. They also lead Europe in terms of military investment. They're like 10%, I believe, of GDP reinvested in their military. I mean, Poland's been invaded like a couple hundred times, in their written history. It's a very vulnerable country.
Well,
Very tough people as a consequence.
Adam Lipinski is the head of the Polish National Bank, and he said something that I find to be I find it to be very, very interesting. And I think if I can find it real quick, if not, I'm going to paraphrase it. Head of Polish Bank, because it's super interesting. Here it is right here. I think this is it. Okay. So this is the article. Let me see, find the actual statement. If I can't, I'm going to paraphrase it. But basically, what he said, and I don't think I have it here. Crud. Anyways, what he said was the reason the Polish National Bank buys gold is because when someone shuts off the power, this is paraphrasing, but very close. When someone shuts off the power to the global financial system, a system where all financial records are stored electronically, we own gold to help our economy rise from the ashes. Now, we don't expect that someone will shut off the power to the global financial system, to the grid, but it's the duty of the central bank to be prepared for. I mean, it's like one of these things. It's like, is this a crumb that they drop at your feet? Are we supposed to take that at face value to hear a central banker say, everything is stored digitally? It's kind of like the story of the DTCC and all the assets held there. You wonder what are these countries actually thinking, and are some of these central bankers, saying these things to clear their conscience, to drop a little crumb? I just found that to be very interesting to say, when someone shuts off the power to the electrical system, that, the system that all accounting records are held digitally. This is why we own gold. I thought it was kind of peculiar.
Yeah, it's an ominous statement, Andy, isn't it? Right?
Yeah,
you hear that. What does that make you want to do when you hear that statement? Makes me want to go buy some.
Well, I think and if you haven't read The Great Taking by David Rogers Weber, watched him narrate his story on YouTube, you understand, I think, deeply the concept of counterparty risk in a systemic world. And it's growing. You look at what happened in Lindsay, Oklahoma last week with the bank failure. I would argue it was the first bail-in in the United States, and not a word from the media, not a word. And it's a bail-in. And, these things are beginning to become systemic. And I think, you add into it the pressure that's mounting across the globe, countries pushing back against so many of these things. We don't have our act in order at home either. So this, to me, when you talk about potential risks, it is of a counterparty risk nature. And that's one of the things that I think is most often overlooked when we talk about gold and silver, is that it's assets in your own possession that are no longer or at simultaneously no one else's liability. And so that's a big deal in my mind. And I think that's a big deal in the BRICs mind too, in that, as you can see, even trusting an entity like the BIS proved to be a liability, and they had counterparty risk there. They'll start to just in-house all of this stuff and build their alliance free from any Western interference. And it's funny because in their statements, they talked a lot about the WHO, the IMF. They said they wanted a new Bretton Woods, but they strived to be within a framework of the IMF. They wanted to assimilate. Instead of being coercive, they were actually, which was kind of weird to me, kowtowing, it seemed, to the West. This may put a fork in all of that and just accentuate the differences and the divisiveness between these two groups. That's for sure. But Yeah, I think there's a lot coming down the pike, and what happened in Lindsay, Oklahoma is just the tip of the iceberg.
Could you expand on what happened in Lindsay, Oklahoma?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. This is something I know we weren't going to talk about this, but originally this was talk about the BRICs, but this is to me is it's all part of the same issue. And that is moving towards consolidation, moving towards new systems, a CBDC, a reset. Who knows what it is? But what happened in Lindsay, Oklahoma, to me is actually absolutely crazy. And I think it's really interesting when you go back to the bank failures of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank. And when that happened, the inquiry at the House, it was the Oklahoma senator who questioned Janet Yellen, Madam Secretary, you just bailed out these banks. Of course, Oprah Winfrey's money was in there. The tech startup money was in there. Hollywood money, big money, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions in uninsured deposits. We're in there. You bailed these banks out, Madam Secretary. The Dodd-Frank Act that was written a few years ago, 2009, said that's illegal. What am I missing? Well, you're right, Senator, she said. It is not something that we're supposed to do. People who deposit money in banks are unsecured general creditors, i.e. last to be paid, and it is supposed to be bailed in. You're right. However, it was an uber majority vote between myself, the FOMC, which would be the Federal Reserve, the FDIC, and the president. We determined that these banks were too systemic. They needed to be bailed out, not by the taxpayer, but by the FDIC. And so he says, well, am I to interpret then if a bank fails in Oklahoma, my constituents will be made whole? No, Senator, they will be bailed in like the law says. So, you look at the banks that have failed subsequently to Silicon and Signature, they've all been gobbled up by JP Morgan or other regional banks. And during the Dodd-Frank Act, they put bail-in legislation. For those who don't know it, you should Google it, bail-in legislation, Dodd-Frank Act, anything over FDIC, which, by the way, only has about 140 billion in assets, backing 18 trillion in deposits. Anything over that amount goes into the bank to be bailed in, goes into the kitty like bankruptcy. But they also said something else as a footnote that I think a lot of people really should know, and I think it could even be a bigger problem, and that is money market gating legislation. Because when Lehman Brothers failed, they held a lot of the money market funds, and everyone tried to yank their money out. It's called breaking the buck. It turns the money market upside down. You don't even get your principal back. Well, there's a lot of institutional money in the money markets, pension funds and insurance companies and whatnot. But over the last year, with higher rates, it's drawn record amounts of money, almost 7 trillion in the money markets. And it's probably even lesser known than bail-ins that if that happens again, if there's a collapse, the money markets are gated. You can't get out. You ride down to the bottom. And people should be aware of that. But going back to Lindsay, Oklahoma and the bail-in legislation, this little podunk town in Lindsay with only 7 million in uninsured deposits, just 7. The bank shuts down a week ago Friday. And they cite fraud. They cite that their assets were far less than their liabilities to depositor or to creditors and others. You are a creditor when you deposit money in a bank, an unsecured general creditor, last in line. So it said their assets are less than their liabilities to creditors and others. Well, who are others? I don't know. But it said that the bank would be taken over by like First National Bank of Duncan or something along these lines. And the insured deposits would be made available Monday. That was this last Monday. They'll be made available Monday. The uninsured deposits, half of which will be made available Monday. The other half possibly will be made available when they sell the assets of the bank. If you read the Dodd-Frank Act, they have 4 years to do that. And again, uninsured, they really don't have to do anything. But when they say possibly, remember the assets were far less than the liabilities to creditors and others. You can kiss. So if you had $1 million in that bank because you're going to buy a new house and $1.25 million house and you put the $250 down already, you got $1 million in your account waiting to continue to pay as your house is built, you'd get your $250 back. The uninsured portion of $750. half of which is 375, you get 6.25 back, the uninsured half plus the 250. That other 375, you might as well kiss it goodbye. And this was nowhere reported. You got to dig for it on the line, and it's the first bail-in. And I would argue it's a trial balloon. They're throwing it out there. Only 7 million in uninsured deposits, yet hundreds of millions in Hollywood and tech startup business gets bailed out in uninsured deposits. But the average Joe and Jane American in rural Oklahoma, well, they're screwed. These are the kinds of things that I think, again, are all pulling in the same direction. You talk about banking issues. You talk about money market gating. You can look at the fact that the liquidity in the market is draining quickly, and the bank term funding program expires down to zero the day after the election. The liquidity will be as low as it was around the repo market problem. There's just so many boiling points. The open borders, the contesting of the fairness, whether or not we believe it. People do believe that the elections may not be fair. The judicial system may not be fair. I'm not saying I do, but people do. None of this is lost on the rest of the world. And then you go around creating 100,000 in debt every second. 1, 2, 3, 4, and keep on going till your fingers fall off. That's how much debt we're creating, $1 trillion every 90 days. And then we weaponize and we sanction and we intimidate. And then we do this with the BIS. Our image around the world is probably the lowest it's ever been. And when you realize that if we had our act in order at home, if we had a strong banking system, if we weren't divided, if the institutions that are the hallmark of this country, the FBI, the elections, the judicial system, the border, immigration, where everyone came here and contributed and assimilated and did so in a very, honorable way. All of that stuff isn't lost on the rest of the world. And I think this is the most charged time ever. And what they did, the West did, to derail the BRICs at the 12th hour, I think only is going to strengthen the resolve of countries that are already looking cross-eyed at the West. And I do believe that, Jay. It is a setback for them for sure. But I think, what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. I think it's something along those lines. And I think these countries think that this is something that is certainly necessary to break free from what they view as madness on many levels.
Yeah. Oh, man. Even in that, Andy, there's a lot of threads. So just on the Lindsay, Oklahoma thing, just to wrap that up, as far as we know today, 50% of those uninsured deposits have just gone up in smoke. They're legitimately gone. And we don't, you're right. This is not the Silicon Valley headline worthy money. This is easily forgettable money from a media standpoint. Not if you're one of those people, by the way, in Lindsay, Oklahoma, but
or if you're the FDIC trying to set a precedent.
Or if you're the FDIC trying to set a precedent. Interesting. So now a precedent has been set. Uninsured deposits are uninsured. We've set that precedent now, right? Therefore, the next time.
Well, they gave 50%, which in and of itself, and maybe because it was only 7 million, so they gave them 3.5 million in uninsured deposit coverage. Yeah. What if it was 70 million or 170 million or 700 million? Then it's a whole different animal.
For sure it is. It's curious to me why they would still protect 50% of the uninsured if you're going to let the other 50% go up in smoke. Like, is that just to sort of limit the response and potential of headline making news or something else? What do you think?
I think so. I was doing a live stream last week, and the guy jumps, in the comment section. He's like, "Dude, I'm in Oklahoma, and there's not a word about this going on." Wow. And when you search it, you'll find like Fox News, Lindsay, Oklahoma. You'll find the FDIC page, but it should be everywhere. It should have been front and center on Zero Hedge, front and center on Drudge, front and center on 60 Minutes, front and center on everywhere. And it's just, don't tell.
Yeah.
But hey, we told you. Look, there it is. We told you. This is precedent. We didn't hide it from anyone. The FDIC has a big write-up on it, as does some of the regional, news stations picked it up, but it wasn't hidden. And I think that's kind of their way. You just wonder, where does this lead and how bad does it get? And when the public doesn't understand what bail-ins or gating are, the acceleration that could happen really fast, I think, has never been stronger. And quite frankly, you talk about ramifications all centered around interest rates. The Fed tried to push down interest rates. And again, what we just did with the BIS just did will only make these countries not want to hold our treasuries at all. And so they pushed down interest rates 50 basis points, lower the federal funds rate, stimulate the economy. And since then, the 10-year treasury is up over 60 basis points, gone the other direction. That's the world's way of saying that we're not, you guys pivot when you're 60% away from your target rate of 2%, where inflation is only going to get worse. And we're supposed to interpret that as a victory lap on inflation. No, it's waving the white flag. So we're not going to take 4% on the 10-year treasury. We want 5%. And it's going up and up and up. And it's just, we're trapped in every way. And the people that we did this to, or the BIS did this to, or is making it difficult on, are the ones that traditionally have been our biggest creditors. So it starts to snowball this global effect. Who's going to buy the 10 trillion in debt we need to sell every year to finance current obligations and previous that are coming due for the next decade plus? And this becomes a tenuous situation that. Rick Rule says it best, and I think it is the best comment for these times. If you're not a contrarian, you're damn well bound to be a victim. It's time to look at this world unconventionally. If you measure things traditionally, I think you're bound to get rolled by the changes. If you look at things through a contrarian lens, you can roll with the changes. And I think that's never been more important. Leading into the election, and probably the next few months after the election, which I think will even be probably more chaotic, but we haven't heard the end or the last of the BRICs, Jay. I know that. I think this will only strengthen their resolve.
I agree. Okay. You can't really beat down ideology. Okay. Look, Andy, this has been fascinating. I need to dig into the Lindsay, Oklahoma situation deeper because that was completely off my radar.
Well, and I think that to me is the biggest indictment of the Western system right there. You're a guy, I watch you. I know that, and you're just the questions you ask, you're incredibly prepared. You're incredibly enlightened. You're incredibly well-read, and you read the right stuff, and yet not on your radar. No. That's not an indictment of you. That's an indictment of the system where, something like this should be understood and spoken of. It should be front and center. And even if it's only a small $3.5 million that were lost, that's something everybody should understand, because I think you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming. People should at least be aware. I talked to a guy last night. I mean, he's spent $7 or $8 million with me already. He's a very wealthy man. And he says, well, is a bank CD safe? Well, no, not if this were to happen. And what about all my money in the money market? Well, do you know money market gating? No, I don't. And so there's so many things that even very well-read people are arguably maybe just reading the wrong stuff. You read the right stuff, and it wasn't on your radar. And that is the indictment of the system that is leading all of us into a bad place, not able to make proper decisions on how to protect ourselves and limiting the exits and hiding them at that. So, check it out. It's not hard to find. Just look up Lindsay, Oklahoma bank failure. It was a week ago Friday, and you'll see exactly. It's pretty much verbatim what I said to you.
And what you mentioned about $3.5 million lost, and you said, what does this lead to? That's what you said, which is so important to think about events like that way, and that this wasn't a thing that happened. It was a precedent that occurred, and probably a trajectory that was set. I mean, that's far more likely what occurs when these scenarios happen. And there's been
it's just the height of being ironic that it was the senator from Oklahoma that was giving Janet Yellen a bunch of crap.
Yeah.
And it was a bank in Oklahoma where you see the first bail in.
Yeah.
And all of the ones that have failed before this, no, not bailed in, not bailed out, just gobbled up.
Yeah. Look, Andy, thank you for coming back on the show today. You guys want to meet Andy? Come to Vancouver in January. January 19th and 20th, the Vancouver Resource Investment Conference. We're back. 80 keynote speakers were flying in from all over the world. You want to have a cocktail with Andy, grab a VIP ticket, come to the keynote speakers reception. All of this is at cambridgehouse.com. An absolutely barn burner of an event. 2 days, jam-packed, geopolitics, macrofinance, mining. It's a ton of fun, and you'll learn a lot.
It is, Jay. In fact, I tell people when I talk about I do often about conferences, and there are only two that I go to pretty much every year, and yours and Rick's down in Boca, which is more or less my backyard. I wouldn't miss it, and it is the best. And if people are looking for trying to find a conference to go to, there's nothing like it. The quality of speakers and the way that it's run. It's kudos to you. It's amazing. It's an honor to be there. I can't wait, and I look forward to seeing you in person and having a beer with you too. Hopefully, you're a busy guy when you're there, but it'd be my honor to sit down with you for a few minutes as well.
Yeah, likewise, buddy. I can't wait. Well, look, thanks so much for coming back on, Andy. Check out Miles Franklin for your precious metals needs. And Andy, it's always a blast chatting with you, brother. I appreciate it.
You too, my man. You have a good rest of the year. Buckle up. It's going to get crazy. If you ever need to, check back in due to things getting nuts before the conference, just know I'm a phone call away. Other than that, I'll look forward to seeing you in person in a few months.
Absolutely will. Okay, man.